The stranger arrived in Pueblo, Colorado on a Tuesday morning in June of 1878, and Isaac Ashford noticed her immediately because dust storms and drought had made the whole town hold its breath for 3 months straight, waiting for something to change. She came rolling down Main Street with a peculiar cart trailing behind her horse, a contraption covered in black cloth that looked like it might contain anything from snake oil to dynamite. And when she stopped in front of the general store, Isaac watched from his spot outside the saloon, where he had been nursing a whiskey and contemplating whether another season of this dry heat would finally drive him back east. The woman climbed down from her horse with the kind of deliberate grace that suggested she had done this 1,000 times before. Her dark blue traveling dress coated in the same red dust that covered everything in this God-forsaken corner of Colorado. She was tall, with black hair pinned up in a style that was already coming undone from the journey, and when she turned to inspect her cart, Isaac saw a face that was all sharp angles and determined expression, the kind of face that belonged to someone who had decided something important about life and refused to be swayed. "You planning to sit there all day staring, or are you going to help me unload this equipment?" Her voice carried across the street with unexpected clarity, and Isaac realized with a start that she was talking directly to him. He stood up from the bench, his long legs unfolding slowly because he had been sitting for nearly 2 hours, and everything ached these days after too many years of breaking horses and sleeping on hard ground. "Madam, I was not staring. I was merely observing the street or me." She had already turned back to her cart and was unfastening the ropes that held the black cloth in place. "Either way, I could use someone with strong arms. I will pay you $1 if you help me carry this into the boarding house." $1 was $1, and Isaac had nothing better to do until the Henderson Ranch needed him again next week. He crossed the street in long strides, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each step, and when he reached her side, she pulled back the cloth to reveal something he had never seen before. The camera was a massive wooden box mounted on a 3-legged stand, with brass fittings that caught the sunlight and a lens that looked like a giant eye staring out at the world. Beside it were bottles of chemicals, glass plates wrapped in protective cloth, and a smaller box that she handled with particular care. "What in God's name is all this?" Isaac asked, leaning closer to inspect the contraption. "It is a camera," she said, as if that explained everything. "I am a photographer. My name is Zara Lawson, and I am traveling through the territories documenting the West before it disappears entirely." Isaac had heard of photographs, had even seen one once in Denver of a stiff-looking family standing in front of a painted backdrop, but he had never met anyone who actually made them. "The West is not going anywhere, Miss Lawson." "Mrs. Lawson," she corrected, and Isaac felt something deflate in his chest before she continued. "Though I am a widow now, so I suppose Miss is technically correct again. And yes, the land will remain, but the wildness of it will not. In 20 years, there will be railroads everywhere, cities where camps used to be, laws where there was only survival. I intend to capture what remains while I still can." She spoke with the fervor of someone describing a holy mission, and Isaac found himself fascinated despite his natural inclination toward skepticism. He helped her lift the camera, which was heavier than it looked, and together they carried it across the street to the boarding house where Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had arrived during the gold rush and decided to stay, rented rooms to anyone with money and manners. Mrs. Chen took one look at Zara's equipment and quoted a price that was probably double the usual rate, but Zara did not even try to negotiate. She paid for a week in advance and asked if there was a room with good northern light where she could set up her darkroom. "You plan to stay in Pueblo for a week?" Isaac asked as they made a second trip to retrieve the rest of her supplies. "There is not much here to photograph unless you want pictures of dust and disappointed prospectors." "I photograph people," Zara said. "Every town has stories written in the faces of the people who live there. I want to document the cowboys, the miners, the shopkeepers, the women who run the brothels, the Chinese railroad workers, the Mexican farmers, everyone who built this place with their own hands." Isaac thought about his own face, weathered and lined at 26 from too much sun and not enough hope. Sounds like a lot of sitting still for people who are used to moving. "That is the challenge," Zara agreed. She stopped walking and looked at him directly for the first time, really looked, and Isaac felt pinned in place by the intensity of her gaze. "You have an interesting face. Good bone structure, and your eyes have seen things. Would you sit for a portrait?" "I do not think so, madam." "I am not the sitting type. No one is until they try it. I will pay you $2 for 1 hour of your time. All you have to do is sit still." Isaac laughed, a short bark of sound that had no real humor in it. "Lady, I have spent my entire life moving. Breaking horses, herding cattle, running from one disaster to another. Sitting still sounds like dying." "Then consider it practice for when you are old," Zara said, and there was something almost like a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Come to my room tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I will be set up by then." She did not wait for him to agree or refuse, just turned and walked into the boarding house with the last of her equipment, leaving Isaac standing in the street wondering what had just happened to his quiet morning. That night at the saloon, Isaac told the other cowboys about the photographer, and they laughed until whiskey came out of Bill Morrison's nose. "A woman traveling alone with a camera," Bill wheezed, wiping his face with his sleeve. "What is the world coming to? Next you will tell me they want to vote." "She is a widow," Isaac said, and he was not sure why he felt the need to defend her. "She is documenting the West." "Documenting what? How miserable we all are." That was Tom Fletcher, who had lost his ranch to drought 2 years ago and had been bitter ever since. "The West does not need documenting. It needs rain and better luck." But Isaac could not stop thinking about Zara's intensity, the way she talked about capturing something before it disappeared. He had never thought about the West disappearing before, had always assumed it would just keep going the way it always had. But now that she had planted the idea in his head, he could see it. The railroad pushing farther every year, the towns getting bigger and more civilized, the wild spaces shrinking until they were just memories told by old men in saloons. He showed up at the boarding house the next day at 2 o'clock, partly because he needed the $2 and partly because he could not stop himself. Zara had transformed her room into something that looked like a combination of a laboratory and an artist's studio. The camera stood in the center on its tripod, aimed at a chair positioned near the window where afternoon light fell in a golden shaft. Glass bottles lined the dresser, each labeled in neat handwriting with names like collodion and silver nitrate. The smell was sharp and chemical, making Isaac's eyes water. "You came," Zara said, and she sounded genuinely pleased. She had changed into a simpler dress, dark gray with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and her hair was still pinned up but in a looser style that made her look younger. "Sit in that chair, please. Do not worry about the smell. You will get used to it." Isaac sat, feeling immediately awkward with his long limbs and rough clothes in this carefully arranged space. "Now what?" "Now you wait while I prepare the plate." Zara moved to the dresser and began working with quick, practiced movements, pouring one chemical over a glass plate, tilting it to coat the surface evenly, then dipping it into another solution. This process requires perfect timing. The plate has to be coated, exposed, and developed while the collodion is still wet, which means I have about 15 minutes from start to finish. Seems like a lot of trouble for one picture, Isaac said. All worthwhile things require trouble, Zara replied. She slid the prepared plate into a wooden holder and brought it to the camera, her movements careful and precise. Now, I need you to stay very still for about 30 seconds. Do not blink if you can help it. Do not move at all. Just look at the lens and think about something that matters to you. Isaac wanted to ask what kind of something, but Zara had already ducked behind the camera, hidden by the black cloth draped over it. He stared at the lens, at his own distorted reflection in the glass, and tried to think of something that mattered. His father had mattered once, before the war killed him. His mother had mattered until fever took her when Isaac was 16. The ranch he had worked on in Texas had mattered until the owner decided to sell it out from under everyone. There was a girl in Kansas who might have mattered, but she married a banker instead of a cowboy with empty pockets and uncertain prospects. Perfect, Zara said, emerging from behind the camera. You have a very still quality about you. Most people fidget or try to smile, but you just went somewhere else entirely. She took the plate back to her chemicals and began the developing process, which involved more careful pouring and tilting and waiting. Isaac stayed in the chair because she had not told him he could leave, and he watched her work with a kind of fascination he usually reserved for watching a really good horse handler break a wild stallion. "Why did you decide to do this?" he asked. "Traveling alone, taking pictures." "It must be difficult." Zara did not look up from her work. "My husband was a photographer in Boston. He taught me the process, but he never took me seriously as an artist. When he died of pneumonia 2 years ago, I inherited his equipment and realized I had a choice. I could stay in Boston and become someone else's wife, or I could go west and make something of my own. So you chose the harder path." "I chose the more interesting path," Zara corrected. "Boston was suffocating me. All those rules about what women can and cannot do, all those expectations. Out here, no one cares about the rules because they are too busy surviving. I can work, I can travel, I can be myself without having to apologize for it." The plate she was working on slowly revealed an image, and Isaac watched his own face emerge from the glass like a ghost materializing. It was a strange experience, seeing himself from the outside, and he was startled by how weathered he looked, how much older than his 26 years. "That is remarkable," he said quietly. Zara finally looked up and smiled, a real smile this time that transformed her whole face. "It is it not? Every time I develop a plate, I feel like I am performing magic, capturing light and shadow, preserving a moment that would otherwise vanish forever." She let the plate dry and then showed it to him properly, and Isaac stared at the image of himself, at the way the light caught the angles of his face and made him look almost noble, like someone from a history book, instead of just another cowboy drifting through Colorado. "You can keep it if you want," Zara said, "or I can make a print for you later. I plan to keep a negative for my collection, but the image belongs to you as much as to me." Isaac did not know what he would do with a photograph of himself, but he found himself nodding anyway. "How much longer are you staying in Pueblo?" "I have the room for a week, but it depends on how many people are willing to sit for portraits. I need at least 20 good images before I move on to the next town." "Where are you headed after this?" "Santa Fe, then west to California." "I want to photograph the missions, the gold fields, the Chinese communities in San Francisco. I have a whole route planned out that should take me about 2 years if I do not get robbed or killed along the way." She said it so casually, as if getting robbed or killed was just another minor inconvenience like bad weather or a broken wagon wheel, and Isaac felt something protective rise up in his chest before he could stop it. "You should not be traveling alone," he said. "It is dangerous." Zara's expression cooled immediately. "I am aware of the dangers, Mr. Ashford. I have managed perfectly well for the past 8 months without anyone's protection. I did not mean to suggest you were not capable, madam. I just meant that the roads between here and Santa Fe are full of men who would not respect your capability. Which is precisely why I carry a revolver and know how to use it," Zara said. She turned back to her chemicals, clearly dismissing him. "Thank you for sitting for me. Your $2 are on the table by the door." Isaac took the money and left, feeling like he had somehow ruined something without meaning to, and he spent the rest of the afternoon at the Henderson Ranch thinking about Zara. Instead of paying attention to the horses, he was supposed to be evaluating. Over the next 3 days, Zara set up her camera in various locations around Pueblo, and Isaac found himself trailing her like a shadow, watching from a distance as she convinced skeptical miners and suspicious shopkeepers to sit still long enough for her to capture their images. She had a way of talking to people that made them feel important, like they were part of something larger than themselves, and Isaac saw hardened prospectors tear up when they saw their own faces preserved in silver and glass. She photographed Mrs. Chen in front of her boarding house, the Chinese woman's expression proud and dignified despite the discrimination she faced daily. She photographed Father Martinez, the Mexican priest who ran the small Catholic church, his hands folded in prayer, and his face lined with compassion. She photographed Sally Green, who ran the brothel on the edge of town, and managed to make her look not like a fallen woman but like a businesswoman who understood the economics of supply and demand. And slowly, despite his better judgment, Isaac found himself falling in love with the way Zara saw the world. On the 4th day, Zara came to find Isaac at the stables where he was working with a particularly difficult mare. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "I want to photograph a group of cowboys in action, not sitting in a studio. Can you arrange that?" Isaac looked at her standing in the stable doorway with the morning light behind her, making her hair glow and her eyes shine with determination, and he could not think of a single reason to say no. He gathered 6 of his friends, the ones he trusted not to act like complete fools in front of a lady, and they rode out to the open range where Zara wanted to capture them working with cattle. She had brought her camera on the cart, and she set it up on a small rise that gave her a good view of the valley below. "I need you to ride through and rope that steer," Zara called out, pointing to a young bull that was wandering away from the herd. "Do it naturally, the way you normally would, but do it 3 times so I can get different angles." The cowboys thought this was ridiculous at first, performing their work like actors in a show. But Zara's enthusiasm was infectious, and soon they were competing to see who could make the best run, who could rope the steer with the most style, who could make their horse rear up the most dramatically. Isaac hung back, watching Zara work, and when she finally called him over, he went reluctantly. "I want you to sit on your horse right there," she said, pointing to a spot where the land sloped down toward a line of cottonwood trees. "Just sit naturally, like you are surveying the herd. This will take longer than the action shots because of the exposure time, so you will need to stay very still." Isaac mounted his horse, a patient gelding named Copper who did not mind standing still for long periods, and he positioned himself where Zara indicated. The sun was high overhead, hot and relentless, and sweat trickled down his back under his shirt. "Think about why you stay here," Zara called from behind her camera. "Think about what keeps you in Colorado when you could go anywhere." Isaac thought about it as the seconds ticked by, longer than 30 seconds this time, maybe a full minute or more. He thought about how he had drifted after his mother died, working ranches from Texas to Montana, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. He thought about how Pueblo had been just another stop, until Zara rolled into town with her camera and her mission, and her way of making everything feel important. He thought about how he wanted to matter to someone again. When Zara finally told him he could move, Isaac felt like he was waking up from a trance. He rode back to where she was packing up her equipment, and the other cowboys were already heading back to town, laughing about the strange afternoon. "Thank you," Zara said. She looked tired, with dust on her face and her hair falling down around her shoulders where the pins had come loose. "Those will be some of my best images, I think. There is something about the way you sit on a horse, like you and the animal are the same creature. That is what happens when you spend more time with horses than people," Isaac said. He dismounted and stood beside her, close enough that he could smell the chemical scent that clung to her clothes mixed with something sweeter, maybe lavender soap. "How many more pictures do you need before you have enough to leave?" Zara looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "I have enough now. I could leave tomorrow if I wanted to. But you are not going to." "I extended my room for another week," she admitted. "Mrs. Chen gave me a better rate, and I thought I might explore the area more, maybe photograph some of the outlying ranches and the Pueblo villages to the south." Isaac's heart did something complicated in his chest. "That is good. I mean, it makes sense to be thorough." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment, and then Zara said, "Would you like to see the darkroom process? I need to develop these plates tonight, and it might interest you to see how the images appear." Isaac knew he should say no, knew that spending more time with this woman who would inevitably leave was just asking for heartbreak. But he found himself agreeing anyway, because he was apparently incapable of making smart decisions where Zara Lawson was concerned. That night, in the dim red glow of her makeshift darkroom, Isaac watched as Zara performed her careful alchemy, turning blank glass plates into windows onto moments that had already passed. She worked with intense concentration, her hands steady and sure, and Isaac found himself mesmerized by the process and by her. "There you are," Zara whispered as his image emerged on one of the plates, and Isaac stepped closer to see himself on horseback, looking out over the valley with an expression that seemed both lonely and hopeful at the same time. "Is that really how I look?" he asked. "That is how you looked in that moment," Zara said. "Photography does not lie the way memory does. It captures exactly what was there, no more and no less. Then I look like a man who does not know what he wants." Zara turned to face him in the red-lit darkness, and they were standing so close that Isaac could feel the heat radiating from her body. "I think you look like a man who knows exactly what he wants but is afraid to reach for it. And what do you think I want?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "The same thing everyone wants," Zara said softly. "To matter, to be seen, to be more than just another drifter passing through." Isaac reached up and touched her face, gently pushing back a strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek, and Zara did not pull away. They stood there breathing in the chemical-scented air, and then Isaac kissed her because he could not help himself anymore, could not keep pretending that he was not completely undone by this woman with her camera and her mission, and her way of seeing straight through to the center of him. Zara kissed him back with a fierce urgency that suggested she had been thinking about this as much as he had, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "I have to keep traveling. That has not changed." "I know," Isaac said. "I cannot stay in Pueblo, and I cannot give up my work to settle down on some ranch and have babies and become ordinary again." "I know," Isaac repeated. "But I want you to know that this matters," Zara said, gripping his shirt in her fists like she was trying to hold onto something that was already slipping away. "You matter." They spent the night together in her room, tangled up in sheets that smelled like chemicals and lavender, and Isaac memorized every detail because he knew this was temporary, knew that she would leave and he would stay, and that would be the end of it. But when morning came and Zara woke up in his arms, she said something unexpected. "Come with me." Isaac blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. "What?" "Come with me to Santa Fe in California and wherever else I go. I need someone who knows the territory, someone I can trust." "And you need something that matters. We could matter together." "I am a cowboy, Zara. I do not know anything about photography or art or documenting history. You know horses and trails and how to survive out here. That is more valuable than knowing how to mix chemicals. I can teach you the technical parts if you are willing to learn." Isaac sat up, running his hands through his hair, trying to think clearly when his whole world had just tilted sideways. "I have nothing to offer you. No money, no property, no real prospects beyond working other people's ranches until my back gives out." "I do not need money or property," Zara said. She sat up beside him, the sheet wrapped around her shoulders, her hair wild and loose. "I need a partner. Someone who sees what I see, who understands why this work matters. I think that someone might be you." Isaac looked at her in the morning light streaming through the window, at her serious face and hopeful eyes, and he thought about all the years he had spent drifting, never committing to anything or anyone because he was afraid of losing something else he cared about. "Yes," he heard himself say. "Yes, I will come with you." Zara's face split into a smile so bright it rivaled the sunrise, and she launched herself at him, kissing him hard enough to knock them both backward onto the bed, and Isaac laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember. They spent the next week preparing for their journey. Isaac sold his few possessions, said goodbye to the friends who shook their heads at his impulsiveness but wished him well anyway, and bought a sturdy pack horse to carry their supplies. Zara taught him the basics of photography, how to prepare the plates and adjust the exposure, and handle the fragile glass negatives with care that seemed impossible for his work-roughened hands. "You have steadier hands than you think," Zara said, watching him coat a plate without spilling a drop of collodion. "You just need to trust yourself." They left Pueblo on a bright morning in July, heading south toward New Mexico, with the camera cart trailing behind them, and a whole uncertain future stretching out ahead. The first few days were an adjustment as they learned each other's rhythms, learned how to work together, setting up the camera and breaking camp, and navigating by the sun when the trails became unclear. Isaac discovered that he loved the work, loved being part of Zara's mission to capture the West before it changed beyond recognition. They photographed a group of Mexican shepherds in the mountains, their weathered faces full of stories that crossed languages and generations. They photographed a Navajo family trading at a post near the border, the children curious about the strange box that captured their images. They photographed an old prospector who claimed to have struck gold in California in '49 and lost it all to drink and bad luck. Every night, they developed the plates together in whatever makeshift darkroom Zara could create, usually a tent with a red cloth hung over a lantern, and Isaac felt like they were archaeologists unearthing treasures instead of photographers creating them. In Santa Fe, they stayed for 3 weeks, documenting the old plaza with its mix of Spanish and American architecture, the traders coming in from the Camino Real, the native craftspeople selling pottery and silver jewelry. Zara was in her element here, talking to everyone, finding the stories behind the faces, and Isaac watched her work with a pride that felt almost proprietary, even though he knew she belonged to her art more than she belonged to him. One evening, as they sat outside their rented room watching the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Zara said, "I want to make a portrait of us together, a self-portrait of sorts, though that is technically difficult with this equipment." "How would that work?" Isaac asked. "I would set up the camera, prepare the plate, remove the lens cap, and then run to get in the frame beside you before the exposure time is up. It requires precise timing, but it can be done." They tried it 3 times before they got it right, and when Zara developed the plate that night, Isaac stared at the image with something like wonder. There they were, frozen together in silver and light, his arm around her shoulders and her hand on his chest, both of them looking at the camera with expressions that were simultaneously solemn and joyful. "This is us," Zara said softly. "This is proof that we existed in this moment in this place together." "I do not need proof," Isaac said. "I know exactly where I am and who I am with." But he understood what she meant. The photograph was more than just a record of their appearance. It was a declaration of something that mattered, something that would outlast them both if they were lucky, a testament to the fact that they had chosen each other despite all the logical reasons not to. They continued west through Arizona territory, where the landscape became more unforgiving and the settlements farther apart. They photographed Apache families near Fort Apache, and Zara spent hours talking with an old woman who told stories about how the land had changed, how the buffalo had disappeared, and the railroad had arrived, and the old ways were dying. Isaac found himself thinking about permanence and change, about how Zara was right that the wildness was disappearing, even as they documented it. Towns were springing up where there had been nothing but open range, telegraph lines connecting places that used to be isolated, laws being imposed where people once made their own rules. In Tucson, they met a photographer named William Henry, who had set up a proper studio and made a good living taking portraits of wealthy mine owners and their families. He invited them to dinner and spent the whole evening trying to convince Zara to give up her traveling and settle down somewhere. "You could open a studio in San Francisco or Denver," William said. "Make real money instead of scraping by out here in the dust. A woman of your talent deserves better than this hardscrabble existence." "My talent requires exactly this existence," Zara said, her voice sharp. "I am not interested in making flattering portraits of rich people who want to prove they matter. I want to document the people who built this country with their own hands and received nothing but hardship in return. That work cannot be done from a comfortable studio." Isaac loved her even more for that answer, for her absolute certainty about her purpose, and when they left Tucson the next morning, he told her so. "I love you," he said as they rode out into the desert sunrise. "I should have said it before, but I was afraid it might scare you away." Zara reined in her horse and turned to look at him with tears shining in her eyes. "I love you too, Isaac Ashford. I have loved you since you agreed to sit still for me that first day, since you looked at that camera lens and showed me your whole soul without even realizing it." They kissed there in the middle of the empty road with their horses standing patiently and the camera cart waiting behind them. And Isaac thought that this was what happiness felt like, this sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be with exactly the right person. The journey to California took them through autumn and into winter, and they saw the seasons change the landscape from summer brown to winter gray. They photographed gold miners in the Sierra Nevada foothills, their faces hungry and hopeful despite years of disappointment. They photographed Chinese laborers who had built the railroad and were now trying to build lives in a country that did not want them. They photographed a group of women running a farm cooperative outside Sacramento, proving that women could succeed at anything if given the chance. In San Francisco, Zara found a gallery owner who was interested in exhibiting her work, and they spent a month making prints of their best images, creating a collection that told the story of the West in faces and places most people never saw or thought about. The exhibition opened in February of 1879, and Isaac stood in the corner of the gallery watching wealthy San Francisco society examine Zara's photographs, with expressions ranging from fascination to discomfort. Some of them seemed to expect romantic landscapes and heroic cowboys, and instead they got hardship and dignity, reality instead of myth. Zara was radiant that night, moving through the crowd in a borrowed silk dress, explaining her process and her mission to anyone who would listen. Isaac watched her with pride and a small amount of possessiveness, aware that other men were looking at her with admiration and probably wondering what she was doing with a rough cowboy like him. But at the end of the night, when the gallery emptied and they were left alone among the images they had created together, Zara came to him and took his hands. "The gallery owner wants to finance another journey," she said. "He thinks we should go north to Oregon and Washington Territory, document the logging camps and the fishing villages and the native tribes. He will pay for our supplies and equipment in exchange for having first rights to exhibit the images." Isaac felt something settle in his chest, a sense of the future opening up in a way he had never imagined possible. "So we keep going." "We keep going," Zara confirmed, "if you still want to." "I want to spend the rest of my life going wherever you go," Isaac said. "I want to matter with you until we are too old to travel anymore and have to tell stories about our adventures to whoever will listen." Zara laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Isaac had ever heard. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Ashford." They married the next week in a simple ceremony at City Hall, with the gallery owner and his wife serving as witnesses. Zara kept her own name for her work, but took Isaac's for everything else, and Isaac did not care what she called herself as long as she stayed beside him. They spent the next 5 years traveling through the West, documenting everything they could before the frontier closed entirely. They went to Oregon and Washington as planned, then back east to the Dakotas when they heard about conflicts between homesteaders and the remaining buffalo hunters. They photographed everything: the last great cattle drives, the final battles of the Indian Wars, the building of the transcontinental railroad connections that would end the era of the covered wagon. Zara's work gained recognition, and galleries in New York and Chicago began exhibiting her photographs. She published a book called Faces of the Frontier that became surprisingly popular, and critics praised her ability to capture humanity in the harshest conditions. Isaac learned to be a skilled photographer in his own right, though he always insisted that Zara was the true artist and he was just the assistant. But they both knew that was not quite true. Isaac had an eye for composition that Zara sometimes lacked, and his knowledge of the land and the people helped them find subjects and stories that Zara might have missed. They became a true partnership, each bringing something essential to their shared work. In the spring of 1884, they returned to Pueblo, Colorado for the first time since they had left 6 years earlier. The town had grown larger, more civilized, with proper streets and gas lamps and a new courthouse. Mrs. Chen still ran her boarding house, though she had expanded it and hired staff. Many of the cowboys Isaac had known had moved on or settled down, and the wild edge that had defined Pueblo when Zara first arrived had been worn smooth by progress and prosperity. They set up Zara's camera in the same spot where she had taken those first portraits, and they spent a week photographing the changes and the people who had stayed. It was bittersweet, seeing how much had transformed, knowing that the West they had spent years documenting was truly disappearing just as Zara had predicted. On their last day in Pueblo, they rode out to the open range where Zara had photographed Isaac on horseback all those years ago. The land looked the same, still empty and beautiful, but they both knew it would not stay that way much longer. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked as they sat on a blanket watching the sunset. "Leaving your life as a cowboy to follow me around taking pictures?" Isaac thought about it honestly, thought about the life he might have had if Zara had never rolled into Pueblo with her camera and her mission. He probably would have kept drifting, working ranches until his body gave out, dying alone and forgotten without ever mattering to anyone. "Not for a single second," he said. "You gave me a purpose, Zara. You gave me a reason to sit still long enough to figure out who I was and what I wanted. I have never regretted that." Zara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. After a while, she said, "I am pregnant." Isaac went very still, processing the words. "You are certain?" "I have suspected for a few weeks, but I did not want to say anything until I was sure. We are going to have a baby, Isaac, probably in late October or early November if I am calculating correctly." Isaac turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "What do you want to do? Do you want to stop traveling? We could settle somewhere, buy a house, give the child stability." Zara smiled. "I want to keep working as long as I can. We can travel slower, take fewer risks, but I do not want to give up our mission just because we are becoming parents. This child will be born into adventure, will grow up seeing the world through a camera lens, will understand that there are more important things than comfort and safety." "You are going to be an extraordinary mother," Isaac said, and he meant it. Unconventional, maybe, but extraordinary. Their daughter was born in November of 1884 in a rented room in Denver, and they named her Clara after Zara's mother and hope for what she represented. She was a tiny thing with dark hair like her mother and Isaac's gray eyes, and from the moment Isaac held her, he understood what it meant to have something worth protecting at all costs. They did slow down after Clara was born, spending months at a time in various cities instead of constantly moving, setting up a more permanent darkroom wherever they stayed so Zara could keep working while caring for the baby. Isaac took on more of the photography work during those early months, going out to document subjects while Zara stayed back with Clara, and he discovered that he had become a skilled photographer in his own right, able to capture the stories Zara cared about with sensitivity and artistry. Clara grew up in darkrooms and on the road, learning to walk by pushing herself up against camera tripods, learning to talk by babbling along with her mother's explanations of the collodion process. By the time she was 3, she could sit perfectly still for portraits, understanding instinctively that the camera required patience and cooperation. In 1888, when Clara was nearly 4, they returned to Pueblo one last time. The town had transformed into a small city, with brick buildings and electric lights and all the trappings of modern civilization. The wild edge was gone completely now, replaced by order and respectability. They found Mrs. Chen still running her boarding house, though she was older now, her hair completely gray. She cried when she saw them, hugging Zara and then Isaac, and then bending down to examine Clara with delight. "You made a family," Mrs. Chen said, wiping her eyes. "You came back to show me you made a family." They stayed for 2 weeks, and Zara organized an exhibition at the new library, showing all the images they had taken in Pueblo and the surrounding area over the years. The town gathered to see themselves preserved in glass and silver, to remember what they had looked like before time and prosperity had changed them. Isaac stood in the library with Clara on his shoulders, watching people react to Zara's work, and he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had done what they set out to do. They had documented a moment in history that was already passing into memory, had captured faces and places that would otherwise have been forgotten. On their last night in Pueblo, they took Clara to the open range where it had all begun. They set up the camera one final time, and Zara prepared a plate with Clara watching carefully, asking questions about every step of the process. "We are going to take a family portrait," Zara explained to their daughter. "All three of us together, in the place where your father and I fell in love." They positioned themselves in front of the camera, Isaac and Zara flanking Clara, and Zara set the timer mechanism she had recently acquired that allowed for self-portraits without the frantic running. They stood together as the seconds ticked away, and Isaac looked at his family and felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible. When they developed the plate that night, Clara hovering nearby, fascinated by the image appearing in the chemical bath, Isaac saw three people who belonged together absolutely. The photograph showed a family built on love and shared purpose. Three people who had chosen adventure over security and had been rewarded with something deeper than comfort. They continued their work for another decade, traveling less frequently as Clara grew older and needed more stability for her education. They eventually settled in Denver, where Zara opened a gallery and studio that became famous for its uncompromising documentation of Western life. Isaac continued to work beside her, and together they trained a new generation of photographers who understood that art could be both beautiful and truthful, that documenting reality was more important than creating fantasy. Clara grew up to be a photographer herself, carrying on her mother's mission with the new, easier cameras that did not require wet plates and dangerous chemicals. She traveled to places her parents had never been, documenting the 20th century the way Zara had documented the 19th. And she always credited her parents with teaching her to see the world clearly and capture it honestly. In their later years, when travel became too difficult and their hands too unsteady for the delicate work of preparing plates, Isaac and Zara spent their time organizing their life's work into a comprehensive archive. They had taken thousands of photographs over 30 years, and each one represented a person or place or moment that might otherwise have been lost to time. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, surrounded by their grown daughter and their three grandchildren, they looked through the old photographs together. There was the image of Isaac on horseback, young and uncertain, not yet knowing what his life would become. There was Zara in her traveling dress, fierce and determined, ready to change the world one photograph at a time. There were cowboys and miners, shopkeepers and priests, Chinese laborers and Mexican farmers, all the faces of the frontier preserved forever. And there was the self-portrait from Pueblo, the three of them together in the place where everything had begun, proof that they had existed and mattered and built something lasting out of light and chemistry and love. Isaac held Zara's hand, gnarled now with arthritis but still strong, still steady, and he thought about that first day when she had rolled into Pueblo with her camera on a cart and asked him to sit still. He had been a man who could never stay in one place, who defined himself by constant motion, but Zara had given him a reason to be still long enough to see himself clearly. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every single moment exactly the same way." Zara squeezed his hand and smiled with the same fierce joy she had shown all those years ago in Mrs. Chen's darkroom. "So would I. We built something real, Isaac. We mattered." And they had. Their photographs outlived them by generations. ending up in museums and universities, studied by historians trying to understand what the American West had really been like before progress sanitized it into myth. The faces Zara and Isaac captured told stories of hardship and dignity, survival and hope, the real stories of real people who built a nation with their own hands and received little recognition for it. But more than the photographs, more than the historical importance of their work, Isaac and Zara had built a life together that proved love could exist without possession. That partnership could be more powerful than either person alone, that choosing someone did not mean giving up yourself, but rather becoming more fully who you were always meant to be. Isaac Ashford died peacefully in his sleep in 1931 at the age of 79, and Zara Lawson followed him 6 months later, unable to imagine a world where they were not working side by side. They were buried together in Denver with a simple headstone that read, "They saw clearly and captured honestly," which was the greatest compliment either of them could have imagined. Their daughter Clara made sure their archive was preserved and cataloged, donating the entire collection to the Denver Public Library, where it remains to this day, a testament to two people who loved each other and the West with equal passion. The photographs continue to tell their stories, faces emerging from silver and glass to remind viewers that history is made of individual moments, individual choices, individual people who decided to matter, despite all the reasons not to. And in one photograph, preserved carefully in a special climate-controlled vault, a young cowboy sits on horseback on the Colorado prairie, looking out over the land with an expression that is both lonely and hopeful, captured by a woman with a camera who saw him more clearly than he saw himself, who loved him into being someone who could sit still long enough to become the person he was always meant to be. That photograph, more than any other, tells the whole story. It shows the exact moment when Isaac Ashford stopped drifting and started living, when he sat still longer than he ever had, and discovered that stillness was not dying, but rather the beginning of everything that would matter for the rest of his life.